Okay, we're diving straight into a really concerning story today. The recent plane crash in San Diego, down in the Murphy Canyon neighborhood, right near Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport. It was a small Cessna Citation business jet that went down.
Yeah, tragic news. And a stark reminder, really, of the risks,
Hmm.
especially when it impacts a residential area like that. A business jet, too, makes you immediately wonder about the specifics.
Absolutely. And the worst part, obviously, is the loss of life. At least three people on board confirmed dead. Just awful. But then there's this almost unbelievable part. Nobody on the ground hurt.
It's astonishing.
Despite, jet fuel fires, power lines down, houses damaged. It's incredible. So what we want to do here is really unpack what we know so far. Look at that NTSB briefing, the initial info, try to understand the key factors, what exactly happened here, what combination of things led to this.
That's the mission, right? Go beyond the headlines, piece together that puzzle of what went wrong based on what's available now.
Okay, let's start with the plane itself. A Cessna Citation. An older one, apparently. Maybe a Citation 550 model.
That's what's being reported. Built
Yeah.
around, what, 1985?
Yeah, about that. So roughly 40 years old. When you hear about an aircraft that age, what jumps out?
Well, citations are generally solid planes, kind of a workhorse in business aviation.
Hmm.
But, 40 years. That's 4 decades of technology development. Think about your phone or car from 40 years ago.
Right. Big difference.
Exactly. So the airframe might be perfectly fine if it's been well looked after, but the avionics, the navigation gear, maybe even some safety features,
Yeah.
they're just from a different era compared to a brand new jet.
And maintenance. Does that become trickier?
It can. Keeping those older systems going reliably, sourcing parts sometimes, dealing with just general wear and tear, it can present unique challenges compared to newer models.
Makes sense.
Mm.
We also saw this detail. The plane was registered out of Homer, Alaska, to a P.O. box. Our sources flagged that as, well, maybe noteworthy. Why would that catch someone's eye?
Well, registering to a P.O. box isn't automatically suspicious. People do it for various reasons. But it can sometimes make it a bit harder to track down the actual direct owner or operator quickly,
Yeah.
which might be relevant when you're trying to understand who's ultimately responsible for the plane's upkeep, its operation. It just adds a slight layer of indirectness.
Gotcha. Okay, moving to something truly remarkable about this. Nobody on the ground injured. I mean, a
Yeah.
jet crashes into a neighborhood, there are fires, down lines, damaged homes. This was early morning, people would have been home.
It's absolutely astonishing.
How unusual is that? To have zero ground casualties in a situation like this, it feels like just sheer luck.
It's highly unusual, bordering on miraculous, frankly. Crashes in populated areas, tragically, often involve ground injuries or worse. The fact that it didn't happen here, it suggests maybe the exact angle it came in where the main wreckage ended up. It just avoided hitting anyone directly. But yes, incredible is the right word.
Let's talk about the operational side. Flying into Montgomery Gibbs, it's a smaller airport, right? And crucially, the control tower closes overnight, around 10 p.m., I think.
That's right.
This crash happened about 4 a.m. So what does it mean flying into an airport when the tower's closed?
It means it becomes uncontrolled airspace. Pilots basically coordinate among themselves on a common radio frequency. They announce their position, their intentions. There's no controller actively guiding them, separating traffic. So the responsibility really falls entirely on the pilot to see and avoid and just manage the approach safely. More workload.
Okay, and add this to the mix. The weather reporting system there, the AWOS, it was out of service.
Yeah, the automatic weather observation system.
We don't know why yet,
Mhm.
but how critical is having that AWOS working, especially for landing at a smaller field like Montgomery?
Oh, it's critical. Absolutely vital. AWOS gives you the real-time, right at the airport conditions. Wind, visibility, cloud ceiling, altimeter setting, everything you need for a safe landing. Without it, you're kind of flying blind regarding the exact conditions on the ground at that moment.
So the pilot was apparently using weather info from Miramar Naval Air Station nearby. Our source said conditions were similar, foggy, low visibility, low ceiling, but it's not the same as Montgomery Field itself, right? How much can things vary?
They can vary significantly, especially with fog in coastal areas like Southern California. You get these microclimates. What's happening a few miles away at Miramar might not be precisely what's happening right over the runway at Montgomery. Even small differences in fog density or how low the clouds actually are can be the difference between seeing the runway environment or not. You really, really need that hyperlocal data.
And we know it was very foggy that morning. Seems like a huge factor. Okay, let's shift to the pilot and the decisions made. There's talk of potential fatigue. The flight apparently started on the East Coast around midnight, stopped for fuel in Kansas. That adds up to maybe 6 or 7 hours of flying before the crash.
Yeah, a long overnight flight, crossing time zones. Fatigue is definitely something investigators will look at closely. We know fatigue impairs judgment, slows your reactions, impacts decision making. Flying for that long, especially ending with a tricky approach in bad weather, it's almost certain the pilot would be feeling it. And that could have played a role.
And then there's the fact it was a single pilot operation. Our sources really highlighted this as a concern, particularly at night in bad weather. What are the risks there?
Well, with two pilots, you have built-in backup. One flies, the other monitors, handles radios, cross-checks decisions. It divides the workload. During a high-stress phase, like landing in fog, that second person is invaluable. They can catch things the flying pilot might miss. A single pilot has to juggle everything flying, navigating, communicating, monitoring systems, making all the calls. The workload is immense. It just increases the potential for error, especially if fatigue is also a factor.
Now, a really key point that came up was the pilot choosing not to use the Instrument Landing System, the ILS. Instead, they went for a visual approach, sometimes called a VIN, which, in this case, apparently didn't have vertical guidance, no glide slope. Can you break that down? Why is that choice so important here?
Sure. So an ILS is what we call a precision approach. It uses radio beams from the ground to guide the plane both left-right, horizontally, and up-down, vertically, right to the runway threshold. It basically creates a precise pathway in the sky, usable even in very low visibility. A visual approach means the pilot needs to actually see the runway or its surroundings to land, and if it doesn't have that vertical guidance, that electronic glide slope, the pilot has to judge the descent path entirely by eye and instruments without that defined vertical track. Given the reports of heavy fog, trying a visual approach, especially one without vertical guidance, that seems like an extremely high-risk maneuver.
And tragically, we know the outcome. The plane came in too low, hit high-tension power lines short of the runway. Our source brought up the Swiss cheese model of accidents, suggesting multiple failures lined up. Can you explain that model briefly?
Yeah, the Swiss cheese model is a common way to think about accident causation. The idea is that safety systems have multiple layers, like slices of cheese. Each layer has potential weaknesses or holes, could be regulations, technology, training, procedures, weather info, human factors like fatigue. Usually, these holes don't line up. One layer catches a potential problem. But sometimes, unfortunately, the holes in all the different slices align perfectly.
Allowing the hazard through.
Exactly, allowing a hazard to pass through all the defenses, leading to an accident. It's rarely just one single failure. And you can see here, the older aircraft, the AWOS out, potential fatigue, single pilot, the approach choice in fog, you can start to see how those potential holes might have lined up.
Okay, let's talk about learning more. We know this plane, because of its age and maybe size, wasn't required to have flight recorders. No black boxes.
Yeah, that's a critical point. Flight data recorders, FDRs, and cockpit voice recorder, CDRs, often aren't mandated on older or certain categories of aircraft like this one was likely operating under. There was maybe some initial confusion, but the NTSB seemed to confirm no FDR and likely no CVR either. If they say there isn't one, unfortunately there isn't one.
How much does that hinder the investigation?
Oh, immensely. Those recorders are gold mines for investigators. The FDR tells you exactly what the plane was doing, speed, altitude, engine settings, control inputs, hundreds of parameters. The CVR captures sounds in the cockpit pilot voices, alarms, engine noise. It gives insight into the human element, the decision-making, what they were experiencing. Without them, the NTSB has a much, much harder job piecing together the exact sequence of events in those final critical moments.
But they do have some audio, right? The communications between the pilot and air traffic control before the tower closed, and maybe with approach control further out.
Yes, ATC recordings should exist up until the final stages. Even without the tower being active at Montgomery, the pilot would have been talking to approach controllers managing the airspace leading up to the airport. That audio is still very valuable. It gives you the pilot's intended actions, their awareness, any reported difficulties. It's a piece of the puzzle, definitely.
So pulling it together, we have an older plane flying into a small airport at night, no local real-time weather data available there.
Right.
Pilot, potentially tired, flying alone, chooses a visual approach in dense fog without vertical guidance, hits power lines.
A really challenging set of circumstances.
And crucially, no black boxes to give us the detailed flight data or cockpit sounds.
That's the situation as we understand it now. It really shows how different factors can stack up, creating, well, a tragic outcome.
And yet, still just incredible. Nobody hurt on the ground.
It truly is. It's the one sort of positive, albeit small, aspect in all this devastation. It defies the odds.
Absolutely. So the NTSB investigation is underway. More details will certainly come out over time. But just looking at this initial picture, it raises some big questions, doesn't it? Here's something for you to think about. We have lots of older planes still flying with different levels of required safety tech. As airspace gets busier, weather stays unpredictable. What does an incident like this maybe suggest, about the balance between regulation, especially in private aviation, and managing the risks inherent in flying? It's complex, something to consider as we wait for more answers.